Barron. I'm the Senior Manager of Health Equity here at Global Genes. And I'm really excited to have this presentation today. We have 4 really incredible panelists who are going to present a little bit. So the first, we're going to kind of do a brief introduction, then we'll have 4 different short presentations that will be talking kind of about cultural nuances and norms to consider when you're working with populations that kind of differ from your own. So each of these speakers are going to speak to their own personal culture and kind of working within that culture. You might remember that the title of this webinar initially was Understanding Cultural Competencies, and we actually changed that recently to Building Cultural Humility. And the reason for that is in the work, as we're doing this work together, Global Genes is also listening and learning alongside of you. And we've been hearing, and this I feel is very accurate, that cultural competencies isn't really the best way of stating what our goal here. You can't really be competent in someone else's culture. You can't, you're not going to get a certificate that says, okay, check, you now are proficient in Hispanic culture or Indigenous culture, right? You're always learning more. You're always trying to understand other folks, other cultures, and kind of be humble in recognizing that you can't really fully ever understand that nuance because that's not necessarily what your culture is. So we decided to change the title to kind of reflect that. So with that being said, we're going to start off today with Monair McGregor. Dr. McGregor is the Community Engagement Program Lead at SiteBridge Research, Inc. She has worked in the community for 20 plus years, and her career spans work in the university, nonprofit health organization, government, faith-based, and community groups. Currently, Monair works at SiteBridge Research, Inc., a company that proudly champions diversity as part of its mission. The vital work of addressing health disparities in clinical studies for communities of colors and other historically medically marginalized group is a cornerstone of the SBR community engagement strategy. And one last thing I'll mention, sorry, I failed to mention some of the logistics. We should actually, Shelby, let's see if we can enable closed captions. I just requested it. So you can have closed captions on your screen. We have the chat, which you can use on the right. I would ask everyone to kind of hold their questions as folks are talking. You can jot them down, hold them till the end, and we'll have a specific Q&A period for about 15 or 20 minutes at the end of everyone's presentation. So with that being said, Monair, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today from the lens of community. I present as an African-American woman, and I have Caribbean roots, which I cherish. My mom is from Cuba, my dad is from Jamaica. And in the same way that I have thoughtfully characterized myself, there is a layer of complexity. When we enter the community, everyone may appear to be or reflect a particular racial or ethnic group, but know that complexity exists. We are not a monolith. So let's talk about representation. As you heard in Rachel's intro, she said that I work for a company that proudly champions diversity. This is absolutely meaningful to me. Being able to show up authentically at SiteBridge Research every day is my joy. Now, I mirror the communities that I serve, and I believe that everyone on this call today on the webinar also represent the communities that they serve. And what we know is that community is comprised of people of varying ages, varying races and ethnicities, and with that variety, people will respond differently to medical products, to health education, and how information is delivered, whether it's digital, whether the method is through a stand and deliver or handouts, etc. With the goal being trust and transparency. One way we can achieve that is by having folks in the community look like the community that they serve. Next slide, please. So what we do know is that even if I go into a community, I may face obstacles. Actually, let me roll that back. I will face obstacles. So it's important to build relationships with community allies that will help you navigate the obstacles. The main one being mistrust, the first one right there up top. So who do we want to have as our community allies? We definitely want civic and community leaders. We definitely want folks from nonprofit organizations, clinicians, faith-based leaders, faith-based representatives, people that actually live in the community. This is important. Also, when we're talking about obstacles, there is a very foundational way that we can help to overcome these obstacles by taking the time to do a community assessment, which can help form and craft the story. Taking the time to do the research, build relationships with your community allies, and don't guess. There is no need to guess, especially when you're preparing. Guessing feeds mistrust. Next slide, please. So early engagement is key. If you have the opportunity, and I'm hoping that you do, ahead of any event or activity that you may be preparing for, if you know in advance that you are going to be working in a particular zip code or a town or a county, invest the time to develop relationships with your community allies. Acknowledge that you are coming in from the outside to serve the community. So it's important to take the time to do this investment so that you, through your community allies and your research, can know the social determinants of health that is going on in the communities. That is important, as well as your outreach literature and material. It must match the readability level as well as the languages of the community residents. Also, your community allies can help to remove any barriers, including economic or otherwise, that might be going on in the community that you're looking to serve. Again, taking the time to invest is going to be most helpful down the pike. Next slide, please. We know the inclusion terminology and its application. And as you are participating on this webinar, 100% of you have something on your feet, whether it's socks or slippers or something. I believe that. So let's use that as the foundation of just a quick review of the inclusion terms that we know. So starting with equity. Equity is everyone having a pair of shoes. That's equality, excuse me. Everyone having a pair of shoes. Diversity is everyone getting a different type of shoe. So you might have heels, you might have loafers, you might have sneakers. That's fine. Equity, to be correct, equity is getting everyone a pair of shoes that fits. You have wide feet, you have narrow feet, you have flat feet, you don't. That's equity. Everyone getting a pair of shoes that fit. That's important. Acceptance is understanding that we all wear different kinds of shoes, and belonging is wearing the shoes that you want without judgment. So everyone is familiar with those 5 terms as far as inclusion is concerned, but knowledge of terms is not enough. We have to start with honesty. And to be successful, we really have to look inward. So here's an article by Jordan Bates called Embracing Diversity, the Key to a Peaceful World. Here I have distilled the 6 keys to assist you with an honest self-reflection. And honesty is really the key here. And as you look down this list of 6, I have to say, as far as community engagement is concerned, number 2 is critical. Where are you coming from? And be honest. I'm sure that you had some type of lunch and learn where you learned the inclusion term, so you know that verbatim. But did you take a time to look at yourself honestly? Where are you coming from? What are your influences, whether they are positive or negative? Because if you start by looking at a community and saying, all of the African American women in that community are fill in the blank, you're already starting with assumptions that may not be accurate. And that is challenging. If you're going to serve in the community, you really have to start with honesty, or perhaps community engagement may not be the best fit for your role. Next slide. As I turn it back over to Rachel, I do want to say to you that I'm surely am happy to talk with you more. This is just a brief introduction of what community engagement looks like and how it can be driven throughout your organizations and in the communities that you serve. Giving you my info here, I welcome our interaction. Thank you so much for your attention. Rachel?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Monair. And oh, my timer is going off. You're perfectly on time. That's great. All right. So next up, we're going to hear from Vanessa Hiratsuka. Vanessa Hiratsuka is an associate professor of clinical and translational research and co-director of research and evaluation at the University of Alaska Anchorage Center for Human Development. Her community engagement work has spanned regional, national, and international efforts. During her, Dr. Hiratsuka has extensive experience coaching and mentoring community and university-based researchers and practitioners in ethical, social, and legal implications of genomic research and clinical and translational research, and developing culturally adapted chronic disease and behavioral health interventions in tribal health settings. Her research interests include ethical, social, and legal implications of genomic research and precision medicine among Indigenous populations, cultural adaptation of chronic disease and behavioral health interventions, and engaging individuals experiencing intellectual and developmental disabilities in the planning, conduct, and dissemination of evaluation and research products. Man, apparently my tongue is just like having a hard time getting words out today. All right, so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Vanessa.
Hey, hello, everybody. Good to be with you all today. I'm joining you from Anchorage, Alaska, where I live on Diné lands, and I'm a guest up here. It's currently a little bit dark out. The sun has already started shifting here, and it's become fall. All of our leaves are changing and things of that nature. I wanted to share with you a little bit just about myself there with my introduction that Rachel had so kindly shared. And through that, share some of the work that I've been able to do with Indigenous peoples of Alaska, as well as the contiguous United States. I also do some work with the circumpolar health Indigenous peoples. And so from that background and from my 20 years in the Alaska Tribal Health System as a researcher, evaluator, and program manager, I'll go ahead and share some ideas with you about how you might outreach to Indigenous peoples in your work in genetic research and precision medicine and in other healthcare issues. So if I could go to the next slide. One of the things I'd like to do with this presentation is continue the conversation that Dr. McGregor had started us on. One aspect of that is diversity. So when we're speaking of American Indian, Alaska Native peoples, I just wanted to speak about when we say it's a diverse population, not a monolith. There are 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States. That are currently in 37 states out of our 50, largely in the West. We also have tribal peoples that are not recognized by the United States. So in my introduction, I'm Diné on my father's side, Navajo, from the Four Corners area, Arizona, Fish Point, Arizona. I'm also Winnemem Wintu on my mother's side from Northern California. We're not a federally recognized tribe any longer. That recognition had been removed from the Wintu people. And so you may come across individuals that are Indigenous, but don't have federal recognition. And I mention this federal recognition because it plays into some of the policy considerations that you might be doing. And I would offer, if you are working with Indigenous peoples, you ought to be doing, and we'll come to that in a moment. American Indian Alaska Native people, as many individuals from the global majority, have lower life expectancy, disproportionate disease burden. And this is due to our unfortunate colonial history, war, removal from our lands, slavery, relocation, religion suppression due to boarding schools, inadequate education, disproportionate poverty, discrimination in the delivery of public health and health services and education, justice issues. There's just a wide variety of social inequities and racism that have affected quality of life for American Indian Alaska Native people. And these are things to bear in mind as we're outreaching to this community as a whole or individually. I would mention also that of the 574 recognized tribes and those unrecognized tribes or state recognized tribes, they each have individual stories of how contact and colonialization have affected them. And so, as Dr. McGregor had mentioned, understanding those histories and seeking to engage what those stories mean to that individual and that family and that community are extremely important. We'll go ahead and go to the next, if you would. Being American Indian and Alaska Native is both a racial category that one might check on the US Census, but it's also a political category. And this is something that we see through a multitude of federal documents, be it the United States Constitution, all the way through many different public laws. And through that, there's a federal trust responsibility that the United States has to the federally recognized tribes. Federally recognized tribes are also able to create their own laws as sovereign entities for their people on their tribal lands. And that comes into play when we are speaking about any laws in the way of genetic research. For instance, my paternal tribe, the Navajo Nation, has a current moratorium on genetic research on the Navajo Nation. And so it's just important to know when we are outreaching to certain Indigenous populations on Indigenous lands that there may be policies that are that will impact that type of outreach and the type of genetic research that might be possible in those areas, or that there are some discussions that may be needing to be had in the way of what had occurred and if things are different now. So again, I just ask you to consider, if you're working with Indigenous peoples, specifically on tribal lands, to inquire about their existing policies. Many tribes also have the ability and that they implement in having their own institutional review boards and ethics reviews for research and for dissemination of information coming from those research projects. Next slide, please. And then we also have individual tribally owned and managed or managed by the US government healthcare systems, again, on your tribal land. So these are things to be aware of. Next slide, please. And if I could just jump to maybe the slide, next one. There we are. As Monair had discussed, mistrust is a very important issue to be considered. And when we think about and are engaging with Indigenous peoples, I just wanted to share this quote here from a document from the National Congress of American Indians Policy Research Center that really begins describing some of the mistrust that might be there amongst Indigenous peoples and where it's coming from. So again, just a bit to delve into when we're talking about mistrust and when we unpack the mistrust, what it might include, things to be aware of as we're outreaching and as we're working with the communities. And then if we could just jump to the slide that has the Alaska Native Universal Values. I just wanted to highlight that many Indigenous populations, although we are many, share some universal values of how we might be, how we might practice our lives, how we might go about who we are and what we do and how we interact with others. And so this is a great thing to ask our community partners, our community-based and placed researchers, and healthcare providers, and tribal governments, tribal leaders. Are there documents like this, which is from the Alaska Native Knowledge Network, that begin to describe how people go about carrying themselves, and then inquiring, what does that mean to you? And so I just wanted to offer this as a suggestion and idea of a place that you might start. So I'll go ahead and close out and ask that if you have any questions for me, or if you'd like to see the things that we skipped over, I'd be happy to share those as well. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Hiratsuka. And we're like ahead of schedule now, so everyone is just speeding through. And just to follow up on what Dr. Hiratsuka said, we will be sharing this PowerPoint with everybody to the portal along with the recording, so you will have access to these slides. All right, thank you so much. All right, so next we're going to hear from Nisha Venugopal. Nisha Venugopal is the program manager at the Indo-US Organization for Rare Disorders, or Indo-US Rare. She has a PhD in life sciences, where she studied the role of the cellular antenna called the primary cilium in adult skeletal muscle stem cells. This was her introduction to rare diseases. Her postdoctoral research at the Institute of Bioinformatics and Applied Biotechnology, India, involved a detailed analysis of global clinical trial registries. Nisha hopes to use her experience in the cell biology of rare diseases and policy research to support and help patients gain access to life-saving therapies through research, outreach, and advocacy efforts to drive policy changes in favor of the rare disease patients in India. So Nisha, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Nisha, and I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Global Genes, in fact, following Monair and Vanessa. But then what I'm trying to do here is provide a little bit of a glimpse about what we do at Indo-US Rare to advocate for patients with rare diseases in India and for those in the Indian diaspora who live in the US and globally. Next slide, Rachel, please. Equity for people with rare diseases. What does this mean? It means equitable access to diagnosis, treatment, health, and social care and opportunities. At Indo-US Rare, we believe that cross-border collaborations are key to driving this around the world. Next slide, Rachel. So what you see here is a key gap that we're trying to address. This is a global distribution of rare disease clinical trials across the world, as seen on clinicaltrials.gov. You can see that most trials happen in very few countries in red, and the rest of the world is far, far behind. Of particular interest to us is the Indian subcontinent, which is home to a quarter of the world's population, but less than 3% of clinical trials happen here. There's also severe underrepresentation of the Indian population in genetic databases and rare disease registries, which might result in this distribution that you're seeing on the map here. But what does it mean, the Indian population? Who are we talking about? Next slide, please, Rachel. India as a country is huge. It has a population of 1.4 billion people, and there's an additional 40 million Indians who live abroad across the world. This population is not only large, but it's also incredibly diverse. Just to give you a small glimpse, we have over 150 languages that have been recorded, and 22 of them are officially recognized by the country. There are 9 major religions that are followed, and this spins off into a number of flavors based on local customs and practices that are imbibed. The social structure also is so complex There are over 2,000 castes or jatis that can be recognized merely based on a person's surname. And there are so many castes and tribes that probably didn't make it to this list. Genetically speaking, over 25 distinct ethnic groups have been identified and studied. So we are a diverse, complex population at the genetic level as well. Yet in many of the classifications followed, clinical trials, for example, all Indians fall under one bin, Asians, sometimes Asian Indians. And a lot of problems happen when you have this entire diverse population put in one bin. Next slide, please. So what does this mean? Due to this incredibly huge, diverse population living across a vast geographical area, and in a country that's also resource constrained, India is a low and middle income country, a developing country, rapidly growing, but still, access to healthcare becomes a big issue here. You have too few beds for the patients that exist. The available hospitals are mostly in faraway cities, and most of the population lives in rural areas. And there are very, very few households that have any form of health insurance. So everything comes out of their pocket. Here it's noted 40%, but this is considered to be a huge overestimation. The actual number may be much less than 10%. Rachel, next slide, please. So what does all of this mean from the perspective of a rare disease patient? There are an estimated 70 million rare disease patients in India. And as per the government's latest, which is also the first policy, India has 8 centers across the country through which all of these folks can take up treatments which will be covered by the government's sponsored financial aid schemes, which are specific for rare diseases. As for diagnosis, there are maybe 100 or so trained medical geneticists of the caliber that is needed to diagnose many of these rare diseases which are genetic in origin. And this is a challenge that exists for each stage of the patient's journey through a rare disease, as you can see on the slide. And this is not what you see, what you want to see when you talk about equitable access to anything. The government is working to address this, but even so, there's a really long way to go. Next slide, please, Rachel. So what contributes to this inequity? The numerous varying cultural traditions, which is often linked to many religions that we just spoke about, but it extends beyond just that. There are so many local traditions, local calendars for almost every state and community. We have so many festivals which are not taken into account. Our holiday calendar in India is amazing. We have the universal holidays, Independence Day and such. And then there's this list called restricted holidays you can opt for based on which community that you come from, which background you come from. None of this is considered because they're all put in the same bin. Another aspect is the complex family structure. Indians often live in joint families. And even if they don't live together under the same roof, we are a very close-knit community. So you have a horde of relatives who are invested and involved in all major life decisions, including medical care. So when you talk or think about speaking or connecting with a patient, you're also talking about connecting with the entire huge family. Next slide, please. And this is not the case only in India. Indians are the largest diaspora in the world. Around 4.2 million Indians live in the US alone. This is mostly a highly educated, reasonably well-earning population. So the main factors that act as deterrents are social and cultural. Next slide, please. Inhibitions are coming from the social factors that we mainly spoke about, and also due to a bias from healthcare providers, either consciously or due to a lack of awareness. All of this causes gross underrepresentation of the Indian population in clinical research that we just spoke about. Next slide, please. And at Indo-US Rare, we have a number of programs that are working to specifically address this challenge, which you can see on the slide here. Next slide, Rachel. I want to particularly bring to your attention a technology-enabled patient concierge program, which we are using this. And we use this to provide individualized support and information assistance to patients who reach out to us. If you look at the next slide, we'll see that most of the requests are from Indians or for people from Indian origin. And what we try to do is provide that extra hand-holding to walk them through the different challenges and options and information based on their cultural and religious and language-based background. Next slide, please, Rachel. So what I want to do is end here with the take home that there can be no single rule that applies when trying to include people of Indian origin in rare disease clinical research or even in conversation. The way you say hello is different in 22 different official languages. So what I covered is but a small preview into the diversity that exists in India. And so we're talking about tackling a global problem at the local community level, and this is essential. So I'd like to thank all of you for listening and my team at Indo-US FAIR and all our supporters and partners for the work that is happening to support Indian patients. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nisha. Yeah, what an incredible presentation. My gears are spinning. I have so many follow-up questions and things that I want to learn from each of you. And so I think that we're going to have some really good conversation at the end of this. All right, last but certainly not least, we are going to hear from Carlos Durand. Carlos Durand is the Group Account Director at Barron Advertising, a Hispanic and multicultural marketing agency. Carlos has 20 years of experience in every area of the marketing ecosystem. He has led planning and implementation of marketing programs for some of the most renowned brands in consumer and service categories. In addition, he has launched various business initiatives through his career. He has an MBA from the University of Texas at San Antonio and Bachelor in Business Administration degree from the distinguished Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana in Mexico City. His most recent experience includes work for the California Department of Public Health's Vaccinate All 58, an effort to promote COVID-19 vaccination acceptance among Latinos in California, and Novo 8, a Novo Nordisk brand dedicated to reaching, engaging, and serving Latinos with severe blood disorders. So with that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Carlos.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all and help Global Genes accomplish your noble goals. And yeah, big shoes to fill following here the ladies, Rachel, Monair, Vanessa, and Nisha. Let's see how we do here. So on the next slide, if you could, please. Oh, no, before that, sorry. The previous slide.
Give me 1 second. I have to try and go back.
Can you go back?
Yeah, hold on. I'm going to just, sorry about that. This is the first slide I have.
That's it. Sorry. Yeah, that's
okay.
right. Okay, thank you. So yes, there has been a lot of talk, way too much talk about the topics we're going to talk about today. There is no easy answer, nor a simple set of standards that can give us an answer to questions like how to achieve cultural sensitivity in advertising, or how to demonstrate cultural competency in marketing communications. Now, to add to that, we live in a very complex world from a marketing standpoint, in which messages can spread really quickly beyond our control, for good or for bad. And not understanding, accepting, or appreciating unique cultural nuances can create problems for companies and individuals alike. If nothing else, the lack of cultural sensitivity can hinder your ability to achieve marketing and business goals. So do we need to become experts in ethnography to capitalize on marketing opportunities? The answer is yes and no. Yes, because culture is not monolithic. It's everywhere, it's dynamic, it's evolving, and it's changing with the times. If you want your marketing pieces to be relevant, you have to be contemporary and attuned with the reality of the marketplace and the consumers. And no, simply because you can pursue a degree in anthropology in a few weeks for purposes of launching a campaign. But there are things that you can do to be culturally sensitive. Next slide, please. Very good. And the first thing that you can do is to understand that culture has many aspects. There's this fallacy that some advertisers think that if you just look at the artistic side of your marketing piece and the language, you'll be okay, and that's incorrect. So the answer to the question is to ensure that your messages are respectful, aligned, and embracing the cultural norms of the group you want to talk to. These norms are depicted in this chart, which has been shown in multiple ways, different shapes and forms. I basically just took this one of some research document from a university here in the area. And it's just great. It shows you all the aspects that you need to take into consideration when thinking about being culturally relevant. It's not only the artistic side, but the norms, the values, the traditions, and so forth. Even food, for that matter. So filtering your messages through the lens of all these various aspects of culture with the help of an agency or a consultant or an expert can help minimize your risks. Understanding and respecting the elements that comprise all this culture is what you can do to avoid poor performance. Look at them through all those lenses and make sure that we will resonate and it won't alienate anyone. Now, this doesn't mean that you cannot take risks, then you cannot be modern and you cannot be edgy with your marketing pieces to get people's attentions, because at the end of the story, people is overflooded with messages. So for yours to be resonating with your audience, you need to be getting their attention. So you have to take some edge. You have to add some edge to it, to take some risk. Or why not? The next slide, please. Like, for example, this art piece in the neighborhoods here and around the area in Los Angeles, it looks contemporary, it looks edgy, it looks different, right? And the next slide, please. But there was a point in time, several decades or 100 years ago, in which murals and frescoes were edgy, were different, were contemporary. And some of the most important and most iconic buildings around the world have some of these murals. And when you walk into some of them, you're at awe, like how all this art was possible, right? So is advertising shaping culture, or is the other way around? The reality is both ways. This is a symbiotic relationship, and we have to be respectful of that. Next slide, please. So there is one component of this cultural wheel that we just looked at that is essential to understand when developing communications, and that is language. Language is the primary tool for expression and communication, and to a good degree, the bond between some of the other elements in the cultural wheel. For example, Latino households tend to be larger than the average because traditional values include great respect to the elders, very much like Asian communities or Indian Americans, for that matter. On multiple instances, kids take care of their parents. They live in the household, such as the homes, the households may be composed of the parents, the kids, the grandparents, there's an uncle there, some friend of the family has been a friend for so long that's almost part of the family. And so if you want to send a direct mailer, for example, a direct mail piece, you have to be thinking about the fact that that piece not only is going to stay longer in the household, but it's going to be exposed to multiple people in it. So your package has to be designed and developed for all of them. Even though you may be targeting one person in the household, you should be thinking in the household. How do you use language in such package will matter. And for that purpose, we're going to add that it will be a good idea to be plain, be clear, perhaps at a 7 or 8 grade level, simply because there is different commands of levels of command of the Spanish language or the English language in one single household. And Latinos are diverse. The next slide, please. And that diversity is well documented, is captured in many documents and academic papers and white papers everywhere. And the reality is that when you're speaking to the Latino audience, you're not speaking only to one group, you're speaking to multiple groups. And next slide, please. So this diversity means that we must visualize cultural identity through the lens of acculturation. And what is acculturation? simply means the level of adoption of the immersive culture. The Hispanic market is a challenge, because there are various levels of acculturation at play here in the country, within one's household, within a neighborhood. And these cultural values that shape people's identity depends on their origins, the language preference, where they were born, and how they were educated. And the next slide, please. When you look at these Latinos, you must consider that they're a vibrant group, highly dynamic and diverse, full of powerful voices, and communities are resilient. Understanding how they are shaping culture overall, political, social, and economic standpoints are important. And they're young, a force to be reckoned with. But as modern as they are, as an avant-garde as they are, next slide, please, never forget that they are well aware and are respectful of deep, even millenarian traditions and values, such as the Day of the Day, that is coming here soon at the end of October. And to a good degree, these young folks are the keepers of modern culture and pop culture. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed talking about culture and advertising today. Rachel?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Carlos. And so for anyone who wants to get in contact with any of our speakers, the contact information is here. I'll leave this up for just a minute so you can kind of take a screenshot. Again, this will also be shared along with the presentation on the community portal after this. We have just about 15 minutes left, well, 16 minutes I see here. So I wanted to open it up. I'm going to stop sharing. Hopefully everyone had a chance to screenshot this if they need. And I want to just open up and see if anyone has any questions for any of our presenters today. Feel free to unmute yourself. You shared a story about how in making medical decisions, you have to kind of tell everybody in your family and that they would be somewhat insulted if you didn't do that. So would you mind expanding on that? And just, I think that's an interesting anecdote for folks here to kind of think about.
Yeah, I was actually looking for a photograph to substantiate that, but I couldn't find it, so I didn't put it in. So the story that Rachel is talking about is when we were doing our prep, I kind of said that for every doctor's appointment that we have, you have a list of aunts and uncles and cousins whom you have to call up and inform what happened. And the day that we had our prep call, I had a doctor's appointment. It was an OBGYN consultation because I'm currently pregnant. And if I forget to call one of my 8 uncles or aunts, all of them will be upset. And then this is just a small set. I have 8 aunts and 30 odd cousins. And this is not including my second cousins. And all of them have to be involved in some way, or at least informed so that they feel included. So if it's a major life decision, like a medical condition of this proportion that we're talking about in the rare disease community, you can imagine the support as well as the pressure to take comments from everybody. And India also has this entire alternate medicine and local traditions as well. So everybody has a local healing tip for anything because they've seen it all. And so it works both ways. There's support, and then you have to deal with a lot. And as a community leader, if you want to engage with one person, one patient, you're dealing with that entire family. And that's something to keep in mind. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm gonna see, does anyone have a question? I'll open it back up. Luisa?
I just want to comment on what Carlos mentioned, with the Akari Foundation, and we take care of the Hispanic community. We do everything in Spanish. And what Carlos was mentioning, I was just laughing everything he was saying because it's true. It's like in one household, we have the uncle, and I had my brother here living for a while, and then my mom, and then my sister, and the girlfriend, and the friend, obviously the friend. They never leaves the house. So it is true, and like Carlos was mentioning too, when at least us as a nonprofit organization for the Hispanic communities, we try to focus everything we do in probably I'm gonna use some marketing words because my background is in marketing, but we have to hit basically the mentality of different ages, but we cannot. It depends like their background or the families that we're speaking. We have to be careful. How do we word certain things? I cannot be using some very sophisticated words for a household that didn't have any education. So a lot of the stuff that we do in our social media, we focus in a lot of colors. I don't know if y'all seen our social media, but we use a lot of colors and images, but we have a very small context, and we try to make more videos and more, if you need information, contact here, and send us a message on WhatsApp. And, we're trying to figure out the way in how to get into this population. Like I mentioned, my background is in marketing and experiential marketing, which means that we go out there in the field and we look for the consumers. So because I live in San Antonio in Texas, everything that we do here is very different than if you go do marketing in California or in New York for the Hispanic community. It's very different. So when companies came to me asking for help, they said, Texas is one of the hardest market for us to hit, and to get people. And it's like, well, is it the way you're promoting your things? You have to find that way. So I really love everything that Carlos was saying, because, it's 100% true. Thank you, Carlos.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And that's true. I mean, definitely the Latino Texas, the Texan Latino, or Tejano for that matter, it's very particular. And if you don't speak right to them, they probably, the messages are going to pass them through, and they will ignore you. But yeah, thank you.
And I think that also brings up a good point of talking about kind of communication channels and the best way to do that, right? You mentioned WhatsApp. I don't know if everyone here on the call is familiar with that, but that's certainly a tool that's used a lot in certain cultures and countries as a way to disseminate information. I know when I was living in Mozambique, that's like all the events, you would find out about what was happening where and when, and like little posters, social tiles would be sent, just being kind of forwarded and passed on through WhatsApp. And that's kind of how the community engaged with each other. And I know that I think it was Vanessa who shared some plain language resources in the chat. And we're actually going to talk a little bit more about that on our next webinar. We have someone that's an expert in kind of health literacy, and so he'll be speaking on some more of that as well. So we'll be able to continue that conversation. Yeah, Johan.
Well, I see that Dana had her hand up, so she can go first.
Okay, Dana, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. So we're a part of, my name is Dana Bradley, and I'm a part of Combined Brain. And the reason why we're here is because we got a grant in order to translate some of our health surveys into several more languages than just English, right? But just based on this conversation today, there are so many languages out there, even, the dialects and what have you, and for Indian and indigenous peoples, and probably even Spanish as well. So how do we think about like what language next to take a look at, right? I mean, and to try to translate surveys into, if we've got such a broad array out there, I mean, what is most helpful for folks? Or can you even answer that and it's just, chip away at it and see where we get?
Can I go ahead and try a little bit as a survey researcher? One of the things that I would just encourage is, one, look at the data, right, of your particular community and those languages that are spoken by those that are potentially most affected, and think about reach. But also with that, as we're translating, and we're thinking about surveys, each item and the responses that we have in an item there's an underlying construct. There's a thing in that survey, in that item, in that question that question's about. That's why it's there. All right. And so as you're doing that translation, I would strongly encourage you to also do cognitive testing on that translation to see if the people that are answering it from that language point of view are getting at that central construct in the way you want them to, in the way the survey was designed to do. So having that understanding that they're going someplace in their mind, retrieving the information that you want them to retrieve in their memories, and then responding accurately for that construct and for those responses. And I think a lot of times in survey translation, that doesn't occur. We just translate it without checking to see if the people that are answering it are doing all those things that the original population that the survey was designed to do are also doing. And that's so important, right? Just as Carlos and Monair and Nisha were just speaking about, different people are going to different places in their minds and recalling and responding or not responding because of their cultural backgrounds, their histories, etc. And so that cognitive testing, regardless of what group and language you're choosing to translate, but doing that very important step of just making sure that's happening is fantastic. And again, I just really suggest relying on that bigger reach component and holding that in balance with, are there target populations that your community coalitions and stakeholders have really encouraged your group to focus in on next.
Thank you.
Great question and awesome response, Vanessa. All right, Johanne.
So yes, hi, I'm Johanne Lavoy. I actually work closely with Monair at SiteBridge, and I know that diversity is so important, but it can be intimidating to some people. So I'm thinking that some of you may be thinking, oh my gosh, look at all this diversity, all these languages, all these different ways of living and enjoying life and reacting to disease, etc. So what do you recommend for the professionals out there that are trying to be more sensitive about diversity and making sure that they're diverse? One thing that I recommend is to be empathetic, and that's the number one thing that you need is empathy. Make sure that people know, hey, we are gonna try to serve you the best, but what would you recommend?
That's a really good question, and I think if nothing else, strictly from a marketing and advertising angle, you want to do a good strategic planning process before you go into the market and create any marketing piece or informational piece. And during that process, make sure to spend a good amount of time in the discovery phase of the strategic planning process. And that discovery phase, look at all the databases available to understand who is composing the target audience and what are their attitudes and behaviors to target your pieces the best as you can, because trying to serve everyone can get really expensive. If you try to communicate in multiple languages and multiple pieces, it get really cost prohibitive from purpose of a campaign. Resources are always limited. So what we recommend in those instances, again, just from the lens of marketing, is to spend as necessary time as you can in discovery. Sometimes for the purposes of the needs of the business or financials or so, they are trying to rush the strategic planning phase or the discovery phase, and that should be avoided. Just the answer in short is spend the right of time and during the discovery phase of your project, identify needs and wants and work around them.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's especially important, and something we've talked about a lot is making sure that you're doing you know, like a landscape assessment, a needs assessment, listening to your community and like listening to what they want and need from you, as opposed to going in and saying, oh, we've kind of identified this, we've done some research and we think this is something that you need. And so we're going to put this resource out there and this is great, you can use it now, right? Maybe they don't, maybe that's not what they want. Even if you think that they need it, they might not want it or feel that they need it. So making sure that you're listening to your community directly. We have 2 minutes left. We have time for maybe one more question if anyone has one. Okay, I'm going to ask one more question quickly to
Rachel, if I might interrupt, I see Dana's hand is up.
Oh yeah, go for it, Dana.
It's less of a question and more of a comment, I think, for me, that after having listened to this conversation, you know, some of the things that we're going to be doing are, you know, meeting one-on-one with families of children with, you know, a rare disorder and walking them through how to get on our registry and how to complete the consent and how to, you know, get to the surveys and what have you. And just after this conversation, I think it's interesting that I think up front, when we're communicating with them, we can suggest if they'd like to have family members a part of the conversation, that's okay, that it doesn't just have to be them. And I think, you know, I've learned that today, that, you know, the power of the family in some of your cultures. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And asking first, that's the right thing, you know, and just give them the choice. Yeah. Empower them, in other words.
Well, what a great way to end. Thank you again so much to all of our presenters. Thank you to everyone who had joined us today. I know Irene put a survey in the chat. Maybe Irene, if you want to send that one more time, just so it's right on the top of everyone's chat there. That way we would love for you to fill out a survey, just at some brief feedback on the event. And we'll be following up with the recording. And again, this will be posted on the community portal as well. So you'll be able to access this. So thank you all so much. Thank you to our presenters and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck to everyone.
Thank you, everyone.